There is a moment in the life of every people pleaser when they realize that they have spent years asking other people for permission to exist as themselves. They may not say it out loud. They may not even recognize it, but it appears in small decisions. Is this okay? Are you sure you're not upset? Do you mind if what do you think I should do? These questions can sound harmless, even polite, but when they become automatic, they reveal something deeper. You are no longer simply considering other people's opinions. You are allowing their reactions to determine your identity, your choices, and eventually your entire life. The dangerous part is that people-pleasing rarely begins with weakness. It often begins with adaptation. You learn that being agreeable creates less conflict. You learn that saying yes makes people happier. You learn that staying quiet keeps the environment peaceful. Eventually, your brain starts associating approval with safety and disagreement with danger. You begin scanning people for reactions before you even express what you want. A change in someone's facial expression can make you reconsider your decision. A short reply can make you wonder whether you did something wrong. Someone's disappointment can immediately trigger the urge to apologize, explain, or surrender. And this is where you have to interrupt the pattern. You must understand that another person's reaction is information, not an instruction. Someone can dislike your decision without your decision being wrong. Someone can disagree with you without you needing to convince them. Someone can become disappointed without you being responsible for removing that disappointment. The moment you understand this, something inside you begins to change. You stop treating every emotional reaction around you as an emergency. Think about how much energy is wasted when your mind is constantly asking, how will they feel about this? Before making a decision, you imagine 10 possible reactions. Before speaking, you edit your words. Before setting a boundary, you prepare an explanation. Before walking away from something unhealthy, you worry about how the other person will interpret it. You are physically present in your own life, but psychologically you are living inside everyone else's expectations. That is not freedom. And the first step toward freedom is learning to separate your identity from approval. You do not need to become cold. You do not need to stop caring about people. You do not need to become aggressive or deliberately difficult. The goal is much more powerful. Become capable of making a decision even when you know someone may not like it. That ability changes everything. Imagine someone asks you to do something you genuinely do not want to do. The old version of you immediately says yes. Then comes resentment. You spend the next few hours irritated because you agreed to something you never wanted. But instead of blaming the other person, recognize what actually happened. You abandoned your own preference because you were afraid of their reaction. Now imagine responding differently. You pause, you consider the request, you realize you cannot or do not want to do it, and you calmly say, I can't do that. No dramatic explanation, no 10-minute apology, no desperate attempt to make the other person comfortable. There may be silence. They may look disappointed. They may ask why. And you remain calm. That moment of silence is where the transformation happens, because your nervous system is learning something it has never fully trusted before. Disagreement is survivable. Discomfort is survivable. Someone being unhappy with you is survivable. You can remain yourself while another person experiences an emotion. This is how self-trust is built, not through motivational quotes, but through repeated moments where you make an honest choice and refuse to abandon yourself afterward. People often think confidence means having no fear. It does not. Confidence is being able to act according to your values while discomfort is present. You may still feel nervous before saying no. You may still wonder whether someone will misunderstand you. You may still feel the temptation to go back and explain yourself. But instead of obeying that impulse, you observe it. You tell yourself, I am uncomfortable, but I do not have to change my decision. That sentence can become a psychological turning point, because the people pleaser inside you survives on one assumption. If I am not approved of, I am not safe, worthy, or accepted. Your job is to challenge that assumption every day. Let people have opinions. Let them misunderstand you sometimes. Let them disagree. Let them discover that you have limits. Let them learn that your kindness does not mean unlimited availability, and your respect does not mean automatic obedience. The moment you stop asking everyone around you for permission to be yourself, you begin taking back something far more valuable than approval. You take back your own authority, and once you trust yourself enough to stand without everyone's permission, the need to please begins to lose its grip. There is a moment when you have to realize that every unnecessary explanation you give can become an invitation for someone else to negotiate with your decision. You say no, and immediately you feel the need to soften it. I'm sorry, I would, but then comes the explanation, followed by another explanation, followed by an apology for having a boundary in the first place. You think you are being respectful, but underneath it, something else may be happening. You are trying to control the other person's reaction. You are hoping that if you explain yourself perfectly, they will approve of your decision and you will not have to experience the discomfort of disappointing them. But you cannot control another person's reaction by explaining yourself more clearly. In fact, excessive explanations can sometimes communicate the opposite of what you intend. When you keep defending a simple decision, you may unintentionally signal that you are uncertain about it. And when people sense uncertainty, they naturally look for room to negotiate. Your no becomes the beginning of a conversation instead of the conclusion of one. Consider the difference between these two responses. One person says, "I'm really sorry. I wish I could help, but I have so much going on right now and I've been exhausted lately. And I hope you don't think I'm being selfish because normally I would definitely help." But the other person simply says, "I can't do that this time." The second response may feel uncomfortable for the people pleaser. It may feel almost rude. But notice what makes it powerful: clarity. You do not have to build a courtroom case for every personal boundary. Your time belongs to you. Your attention belongs to you. Your energy belongs to you. You are allowed to decide that something does not work for you without producing evidence for a jury. This does not mean becoming careless or disrespectful. There are situations where explanations are appropriate. If you make a commitment, responsibility matters. If your decision affects someone significantly, communication matters. But there is a difference between communicating and begging for approval. People-pleasing turns communication into permission seeking. You say no, then watch their face. You set a boundary, then immediately soften it. You express a preference, then quickly add, "but whatever you want is fine." You disagree, then retreat from your own position because the room became uncomfortable. Over time, this teaches people something without you ever saying it directly. Your boundaries can be pushed, and once people learn that your no is only temporary resistance, they will keep pushing. This is why learning to say no is not simply about vocabulary. It is about training yourself to tolerate the emotional consequences of honesty. The first few times you do it, you may feel strange, you may feel guilty, you may wonder whether you have suddenly become selfish. That feeling does not necessarily mean you have done something wrong. It may simply mean you are doing something unfamiliar. Guilt is not always evidence of wrongdoing. Sometimes guilt is the emotional residue of breaking an old pattern. Imagine that you have spent years immediately answering every request with yes. Then one day someone asks you to do something and you pause. You think about your own priorities. You realize you cannot commit. You say, "No, I won't be able to." Then silence, your mind starts racing. Did I sound rude? Are they upset? Should I explain? Maybe I should just do it. This is the exact moment where the old identity tries to reclaim control. Do not rush to repair the discomfort. Let the silence exist. Let the other person process their reaction. You do not have to fill every uncomfortable second with an apology. This is where psychological strength begins to develop. You learn that you can remain calm while someone else is unhappy. You learn that a boundary does not require anger. You learn that firmness and kindness can exist together. You can say, "I understand, but I still can't do it." You can say, "That doesn't work for me." You can say, "I've decided not to," and then stop. No emotional performance, no elaborate defense, no desperate attempt to make your decision feel acceptable to everyone. The goal is not to make people happy with your boundaries. The goal is to make your boundaries understandable. There will always be someone who interprets your boundary negatively. There will always be someone who prefers the version of you that was easier to access. There will always be someone who benefited from your inability to say no. Their disappointment does not automatically make your boundary wrong. This is one of the hardest lessons for a people pleaser because approval can feel like proof that you are a good person. But your goodness should not depend on how easily other people can use your availability. Kindness without boundaries becomes self-abandonment. Respect does not mean surrender. And saying no does not mean you have stopped caring. It means you have finally included yourself in the list of people whose needs deserve consideration. The more you practice this, the less frightening it becomes. Your sentences become shorter, your voice becomes steadier, your mind becomes quieter. You stop rehearsing 10 explanations before making a simple decision. Eventually, you realize something powerful. You were never required to convince everyone that your boundary was reasonable. You only needed enough courage to respect it yourself. And when your no becomes calm, clear, and consistent, people begin to understand that your kindness is a choice, not an obligation. Most people think confidence means never feeling uncomfortable. They imagine a confident person walking into every situation without hesitation, never worrying about rejection, never questioning themselves, and never feeling the tension that comes with making an unpopular decision. But real confidence does not work that way. Confidence is not the absence of discomfort. It is the ability to remain steady while discomfort is present. And this is where the people pleaser has to become uncomfortable on purpose. Because if your entire life has been organized around avoiding conflict, avoiding disappointment, avoiding rejection, and keeping everyone happy, then discomfort has become your signal to retreat. The moment someone looks unhappy, you change your position. The moment someone disagrees, you soften your opinion. The moment you sense tension, you rush to fix it. Your mind has learned a simple pattern. Discomfort means danger, so escape immediately. But what if discomfort is not danger? What if discomfort is simply the feeling of doing something new? Think about the first time you refuse a request you would normally accept. Your heart may beat faster. Your mind may start producing reasons to take your words back. You may suddenly feel guilty. You may wonder whether you have become selfish. That reaction can be powerful enough to make you surrender your boundary before anyone else even challenges it. This is why changing people-pleasing behavior requires more than learning the right words. You have to retrain your relationship with discomfort. You have to stop treating every uncomfortable emotion as an emergency. If someone is disappointed because you said no, allow the disappointment to exist. If someone disagrees with your decision, allow the disagreement to exist. If a conversation becomes awkward because you expressed what you actually think, allow the awkwardness to exist. You do not have to immediately make everything comfortable again. This is difficult because people pleasers often become experts at emotional rescue. They notice tension before anyone else. They hear a change in someone's voice. They see a different facial expression. They detect distance in a conversation and immediately assume responsibility for repairing it. But ask yourself something important. Why am I responsible for making everyone comfortable? You can be respectful without becoming responsible for another person's emotional state. Someone can feel disappointed and still be okay. Someone can disagree with you and still respect you. Someone can say no to you and you can survive it. You have already experienced rejection, disagreement, awkwardness, and disappointment before. You are still here. The emotional discomfort passed. That is the evidence your people-pleasing mind keeps ignoring. The problem is not that discomfort lasts forever. The problem is that you keep escaping before you discover that it would have passed on its own. So begin with small moments. Do not start by trying to transform your entire personality overnight. Start by noticing the impulse to immediately say yes. Pause before answering. Give yourself time to think. That pause is powerful because it creates distance between the request and your automatic response. Then notice what happens inside you. Maybe you feel guilty. Maybe you feel nervous. Maybe you imagine the other person becoming angry. Do not obey those feelings automatically. Observe them. You can think, I feel uncomfortable right now, but I do not need to change my decision simply because I feel uncomfortable. That is emotional control. The goal is not to suppress your feelings. The goal is to stop allowing temporary feelings to control permanent decisions. There will be moments when you disappoint people. There will be moments when someone misunderstands you. There will be moments when you walk away from a conversation wondering whether you should have said something differently. Learn to tolerate those moments without immediately attacking yourself. This is where self-respect begins to grow. Every time you survive discomfort without abandoning yourself, you send your mind a new message. I can handle this. Every time you maintain a reasonable boundary despite someone's disappointment, you become more secure. Every time you allow silence without rushing to fill it, you become less dependent on external approval. And slowly, the old people-pleasing identity begins to weaken. You start realizing that peace is not always the absence of conflict. Sometimes peace is knowing that conflict can happen without destroying you. You do not need everyone to agree with you. You do not need everyone to understand you. You do not need everyone to approve of your choices. You need the ability to remain grounded when they do not. That is a different kind of strength. It is quiet. It does not need to announce itself. It does not require intimidation. It simply means that your emotional center is no longer controlled by every reaction around you. And once you develop that ability, something remarkable happens. You become harder to manipulate, not because you have become suspicious of everyone, but because pressure no longer automatically changes your behavior. The person who once feared disappointing everyone begins to understand that disappointment is not destruction. The person who once feared awkward silence begins to understand that silence can simply be silence. The person who once feared rejection begins to understand that rejection does not define their worth. This is the point where people-pleasing begins to lose its power. You stop running from discomfort and you start using it as evidence that you are growing, because sometimes the uncomfortable choice is not the wrong choice. Sometimes it is the first honest choice you have made in a long time. And every time you stay true to yourself while discomfort passes, you become a little less dependent on everyone else's approval and a little more capable of trusting your own judgment. One of the biggest traps of people pleasing is believing that you are responsible for the emotional weather of every room you enter. You walk into a conversation and immediately begin observing. Who looks uncomfortable? Who seems annoyed? Who has become quiet? Did someone's tone change? Did you say something that sounded wrong? Is somebody disappointed? Before you even ask yourself what you feel, your attention has already moved toward everyone else. This can become so automatic that you barely notice it anymore. You become a constant emotional monitor, studying reactions and adjusting yourself accordingly. If someone is happy, you relax. If someone is upset, you become anxious. If someone is disappointed, you immediately search for something you can do to make the feeling disappear. But there is a question you need to ask yourself. When did everyone else's emotions become your responsibility? You can care about people without managing them. That distinction is essential. Caring means you listen. You communicate honestly. You treat people with respect. You consider how your actions affect others. But managing someone's emotions means something different. It means constantly changing your behavior to prevent them from feeling disappointed, frustrated, angry, uncomfortable, or unhappy. And when you live this way, you eventually lose track of your own emotional state. You become so focused on keeping everyone else comfortable that you stop asking what is comfortable for you. Think about how often you may have said yes when you wanted to say no simply because you knew someone would be disappointed. Think about how often you apologized when you had done nothing wrong because someone else was upset. Think about how many times you changed your opinion because the person across from you reacted strongly. Every time you do this, you send yourself a message. Their feelings matter more than mine. Repeat that message for years and it becomes an identity. The solution is not to stop caring. The solution is to stop taking ownership of emotions that do not belong to you. If someone becomes disappointed because you cannot meet their request, their disappointment belongs to them. If someone disagrees with your decision, their disagreement belongs to them. If someone feels uncomfortable because you finally established a boundary, that discomfort belongs to them. You can acknowledge their emotion without becoming responsible for eliminating it. There is enormous strength in saying, I understand that you're disappointed without adding, so I'll change my decision. Those two things are not the same. You can understand someone and still disagree with them. You can respect someone and still refuse their request. You can care about someone and still create distance. You can love your family, value your friendships, respect your colleagues, and still recognize that you are not responsible for carrying their emotions on your back. This is where emotional independence begins. And emotional independence does not mean becoming detached or uncaring. It means you can remain steady when another person is emotionally unstable. Imagine someone becomes upset because you've chosen to protect your time. The old version of you immediately starts explaining. You apologize. You try to make them understand. You perhaps even reverse your decision. The stronger response is different. You listen. You remain calm. You acknowledge what they are feeling. And then you hold your position, not because you want to punish them, but because their emotional reaction does not automatically determine your behavior. This can feel strange at first. You may feel like you are being selfish. You may hear an internal voice telling you that a good person should always make others happy. Challenge that belief. A good person can have boundaries. A kind person can say no. A respectful person can disagree. A compassionate person can walk away from situations that repeatedly drain them. You do not prove your goodness by sacrificing yourself every time someone asks. In fact, constant self-sacrifice can eventually create resentment. You keep giving when you do not want to give. You keep agreeing when you do not agree. You keep staying when you want to leave. Then one day you realize that the person you are most angry with is yourself. Why? Because you knew what you wanted, but you repeatedly abandoned it to keep other people comfortable. That is why learning to stop managing everyone's emotions is not selfish. It is a way of becoming honest. Start noticing the moment you feel responsible for another person's mood. Instead of immediately acting, pause, ask yourself, did I actually do something wrong, or are they simply having a reaction I do not like? That question can change everything. If you did something wrong, take responsibility, apologize, correct it, learn from it. But if you did nothing wrong, you do not need to invent guilt simply because someone is unhappy. This distinction protects you from manipulation as well. People do not always consciously manipulate others, but when they discover that your guilt controls your behavior, pressure becomes easy. A disappointed expression can change your decision. Silence can make you apologize. Anger can make you surrender, but when you stop treating every reaction as an emergency, pressure loses its power. You become calmer. You become more predictable to yourself, and you become harder to move away from your values. The goal is not to become someone who never cares what others feel. The goal is to become someone who can care without being controlled, because your life cannot be built around preventing every negative emotion in everyone around you. Somebody will be disappointed, somebody will disagree, somebody will misunderstand. Somebody may even decide that the new version of you is less convenient than the old one. Let them. You are not here to control every emotional reaction around you. You are here to live with integrity, communicate with respect, and take responsibility for what truly belongs to you. Once you stop carrying emotions that were never yours, you finally have the energy to deal with the one person you've been neglecting for far too long, yourself. Real boundaries do not require anger. They do not require a dramatic speech, a raised voice, or a complete transformation into someone cold and distant. In fact, one of the strongest boundaries you can build is often the quietest one. It is the ability to communicate what you will and will not accept without becoming emotionally reactive. For the people pleaser, this can feel almost unnatural. You may have learned to associate boundaries with conflict. You may believe that if you become firm, people will think you are rude. If you refuse a request, they may call you selfish. If you stop over-explaining yourself, they may assume you do not care. So instead of creating a boundary, you keep making exceptions. You tolerate things you do not like. You allow people to interrupt your time. You answer messages when you are exhausted. You agree to plans you never wanted. And each time you tell yourself it's not a big deal, but it becomes a big deal when not a big deal becomes your entire life. A boundary is not a wall designed to punish people. It is information. It tells others how you expect to be treated and what you are willing to participate in. It also tells yourself something important. My needs and limits deserve to be taken seriously. And the key is consistency. If you establish a boundary today and abandon it tomorrow because someone becomes disappointed, you have not really established a boundary. You have made a temporary request. People learn what you tolerate through patterns, not speeches. You can tell someone 100 times that you do not like being spoken to disrespectfully, but if you continue engaging every time they do it, your actions are communicating something stronger than your words. This does not mean you should control other people. You cannot force someone to behave exactly as you want. A boundary is not, you must behave differently. A boundary is, if this happens, here is what I will do. That distinction gives you your power back. You cannot control whether someone becomes disrespectful. You can control whether you remain in the conversation. You cannot control whether someone pressures you. You can control whether you continue explaining yourself. You cannot control whether someone becomes angry when you say no. You can control whether you surrender your decision simply to calm them down. That is the difference between control and self-respect. And this is why boundaries do not require anger. Anger often appears when boundaries have been ignored for too long. A person tolerates something repeatedly, says nothing, builds resentment, and eventually explodes. Then they believe the only way to be respected is to become aggressive, but you do not need to wait until you are furious. Speak earlier, speak calmly, speak clearly. If someone repeatedly interrupts you, you can say, let me finish. If someone asks for something you cannot give, you can say, I'm not available for that. If someone speaks to you disrespectfully, you can say, I'm willing to discuss this, but not in that tone. Notice what is missing. There is no insult, no threat, no emotional performance, no need to prove dominance, just clarity. That is what makes a boundary powerful. And sometimes the most important boundary is the one you set with yourself. You decide that you will no longer automatically answer every request. You decide that you will think before committing. You decide that you will not repeatedly explain a decision that has already been made. You decide that guilt will not automatically reverse your choices. These internal boundaries create external strength because when you trust yourself to follow through, you stop needing other people to validate your limits. You also need to understand that not everyone will appreciate the new boundaries you create. This is where many people retreat. The moment they notice someone reacting differently, they assume they have made a mistake. But sometimes a negative reaction is not evidence that your boundary is wrong. Sometimes it is evidence that the previous arrangement benefited the other person. If someone was accustomed to unlimited access to your time, your new limit may feel inconvenient to them. If someone was accustomed to you always agreeing, your first no may surprise them. If someone was accustomed to you apologizing whenever they were upset, your calm refusal may feel unfamiliar. Let it be unfamiliar. You do not have to destroy the relationship simply because you changed a pattern, but you also do not have to return to the old patterns simply because someone prefers it. The strongest boundaries are not dramatic, they are boring. You say what you mean, you do what you said you would do, you refuse what you cannot accept, and you do not turn every boundary into an emotional battle. This creates predictability, and predictability creates respect. People eventually learn that your words correspond with your actions, but remember, boundaries are not about controlling who stays in your life. They are about deciding how you participate in it. You cannot force someone to respect you. You can decide what you will do when they do not. You cannot force someone to value your time. You can stop giving your time away automatically. You cannot force someone to understand your decision. You can stop requiring their understanding before you allow yourself to move forward. That is real independence. And as you practice it, something changes inside you. You stop feeling the need to become louder, to become stronger. You stop confusing aggression with confidence. You discover that calmness can carry more authority than anger ever could. A boundary does not need to sound like a threat. It only needs to be true. And when your actions consistently support your words, people no longer have to guess where you stand, and neither do you. There is a point where being kind stops being kindness and starts becoming self-abandonment. You may not notice the exact moment it happens because people-pleasing rarely announces itself. It disguises itself as being helpful, understanding, flexible, polite, and easy to get along with. You tell yourself that you are simply a good person. You tell yourself that you do not want unnecessary conflict. You tell yourself that other people's needs are important, and all of that can be true. But there is a question you eventually have to confront. What happens when keeping everyone else comfortable requires you to become uncomfortable with yourself? That is where the real problem begins. The people pleaser often develops a habit of looking outward before looking inward. Before making a decision, you think about how everyone else will react. Before expressing an opinion, you calculate whether it will create disagreement. Before setting a boundary, you imagine the disappointment it might cause. Before saying no, you prepare an explanation. And eventually, this becomes so automatic that you stop asking what you actually want. You become an expert at reading other people while becoming a stranger to yourself. You know when someone's mood changes. You know when a person is becoming irritated. You know when a conversation is becoming uncomfortable. You know exactly what words will make someone feel better. But when someone asks you a simple question like, "What do you want?" you hesitate. That hesitation is revealing because somewhere along the way, you learn that being accepted was safer than being authentic. Maybe you learned that disagreement created tension. Maybe you discovered that saying yes earned praise. Maybe you found that staying quiet prevented arguments. Whatever the origin, the pattern becomes reinforced every time you choose approval over honesty. Someone asks you for something you do not want to do, and you say yes. They are happy. Your brain records the outcome. Approval. You disagree with someone but keep quiet. There is no conflict. Your brain records the outcome. Safety. Someone becomes disappointed with you and you immediately apologize even though you did nothing wrong. Their mood improves. Your brain records the outcome. Emotional relief. And slowly, you become conditioned to believe that other people's approval is something you must maintain at all costs. But approval is not the same thing as respect, and being liked is not the same thing as being secure. The strongest change happens when you begin to recognize that another person's reaction is information, not an order. Someone can disagree with you. That tells you something about their perspective. It does not tell you that you must change yours. Someone can become disappointed. That tells you they wanted a different outcome. It does not mean you have done something wrong. Someone can dislike your boundary. that tells you the boundary inconveniences them. It does not automatically mean the boundary is unreasonable. This distinction is simple, but it can completely change the way you move through relationships. Imagine someone asks you to do something you genuinely cannot or do not want to do. The old pattern says, say yes quickly before they become upset. The new pattern says, pause. That pause matters. It gives you a chance to hear your own judgment before reacting to someone else's expectation. Maybe you realize you can help, then help. Maybe you realize you cannot, then say no. The important thing is that the decision comes from your own judgment rather than fear. And when you say no, something uncomfortable may happen. The other person may look disappointed. They may ask why. They may become frustrated. You may immediately feel the urge to explain yourself until they agree with you. Do not confuse their discomfort with your mistake. You are allowed to make decisions that other people do not prefer. This does not mean becoming selfish. It means accepting that your life cannot be governed by unanimous approval. Think about how impossible that standard really is. Every person has different expectations. One person wants you to be available. Another wants you to protect your time. One person wants you to agree. Another wants you to challenge them. One person wants you to stay. Another wants you to leave. If you attempt to satisfy every expectation, you will eventually have no clear identity of your own. You will become whatever the room requires. And that is the hidden cost of people pleasing. You may avoid rejection from others while slowly rejecting yourself. You reject your own preferences, you reject your own limits, you reject your own voice, you reject your own judgment. And then you wonder why you feel exhausted even when everyone around you seems satisfied. The answer is simple. You cannot constantly betray yourself and expect to feel internally peaceful. So begin taking your authority back in small decisions. Choose what you actually want to eat. Express the opinion you genuinely hold. Tell someone when you are unavailable. Take time before answering a request. Say no when the answer is no. And when you do these things, do not immediately search the faces around you for approval. Let your decision exist on its own. You do not need to turn every choice into a referendum. You do not need everyone to agree before you trust yourself. Self-trust is built through evidence. Every time you make a reasonable decision and stand by it, you give yourself evidence that you can be trusted. Every time you tell yourself you will protect your time and actually protect it, you strengthen that trust. Every time you say what you mean and refuse to abandon your position simply because someone reacts emotionally, you become more internally stable. Eventually, something begins to change. You still notice people's reactions, but they no longer control you. You still care about others, but you stop disappearing inside their expectations. You still value relationships, but you no longer believe that keeping every relationship comfortable is your responsibility. And that is the beginning of freedom. You were never meant to live your life waiting for permission to be yourself.